Welcome everyone. The webinar on Maggi, smart cities and the internet of people. The session is live on YouTube also. So the link will be shared in the groups and later on I'll share it with Ali and she might share it with you later on also. So No Edge is basically an online platform which was started during the COVID-19 lockdown. So basically, when the lockdown started, the teachers like us had a very great time to conduct online lectures. So this was the initiative I started to teach the teachers and the faculties to conduct online sessions. So basically, how do you create a classroom? How do you record your sessions? How do you share it with the students? So that was the concept behind this. So to our privilege, has up till now taught around 11,000 faculties all across India. We have been to various states during the lockdown period. We went to Tamil Nadu, Bilaspur, Karnataka, then Bangalore, then Rajasthan and Gujarat. So all the teachers across the nation, we had been teaching all this OBS, OpenShot for video editing, then Google Classrooms, then how do you create your own YouTube channels and all. So from that, this concept started. No Edge also have a Telegram group wherein we have approximate 600 faculties. So through there, we get various resource persons. And this is the platform wherein the experienced faculties who are there with us, they try to share their expertise. And today, we have our privilege to have Angshik Chaudhuri with us, who will be sharing this topic with us. So before starting with session, I will just like to brief you with a small intro video about knowledge. Thank you. Now we'll start with today's session. Before that, I'd like to give you a brief about today's topic and the introduction of our today's resource person. So to begin with, today's topic is a webinar on, sorry, today's topic is webinar on Maggi, smart cities and internet of people. Think of Maggi noodles and either you shudder, say, ugh, junk food, or you feel a sense of familiar comfort. In complete contrast, Internet of People exemplifies the cyber-physical convergence, the fast expansion of the Internet at its edge, tighter interactions between human users and their personal mobile devices, push towards a smart city where the human users becomes more central than ever, and where the personal devices become their proxies in the cyber world. In addition, acting as a fundamental tool to sense the physical world. And it is a privilege to have Angshik Chaudhuri, who will be talking on this chat on this topic today. So I'll just give a brief introduction of Angshik. Angshik Chaudhuri has a high-performing global C-suite executive proven track record. Sir has got 25 plus years experience in business transformation. Angshik is a skill strategist in areas of digital transformation, business strategies and planning, solution management, global operations, and creating customer-centric organizations. He has been voted as one of the top 25 executives under 40 in India by Business Today magazines in the year 2008. He is also voted as frontrunner executive by Business India magazine in 2007. He is an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. His professional experience in the outsourcing, offshoring, shared services arena in various senior leadership roles. At Cisco, he had worked as a managing director, strategy and planning for the global growth markets. He was also responsible for overall strategy, driving global segments, go-to-market blueprints, and anchoring consistent nomenclatures. He had earlier worked as a managing director and is chief of staff of the globalization efforts at Cisco, where he was responsible for overall strategies and planning for the offshoring management operation for Cisco. He has successfully set up a headquarter of Cisco covering all the business critical functions in a record time and critical acclaim. I welcome you, Angshik, to present with us the webinar today on smart cities and Internet of People. Over to you, Angshik.
Rupali, thank you. I just want to verify. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Rupali. And thank you for many of you who are joining me on Saturday evening India time. Clearly, you would have had better things to do, but the fact that you've decided to join me and for us to have a conversation on an esoteric topic, I'd say, hopefully has the trappings for the next 1 hour to be a little interesting. Now, as soon as this topic got highlighted, that I'm going to be speaking on Maggi and on smart cities and the Internet of People, every so often I'd get a call when people would ask me, what is your topic? What are you going to talk about? What's Maggi got to do with smart cities? What's smart cities got to do with the Internet? And I basically said, you know what? Hold on. Let's get on to the session. And because I suffer from stage fright, which is that I'm frightened to get off the stage, you will find that I will speak ad nauseum to a point wherein hopefully I'm able to conflate the relative importance of what eating habits have got to do with smart cities and what does smart cities have to do with the Internet. And hopefully that has the trappings of an interesting conversation. This is almost akin to the joke, wherein one evening the economist's wife asked the economist, honey, do you love me? And the economist turned around and said, relative to what? In the sense that there is nothing in its absolute. Everything is abstract to a point, but it is also relative to a point where you've got to be able to conflate different data points to eating habits, to city growth, to urbanscapes, to the usage of the Internet. And hopefully that comes through in the next 30 odd minutes as we speak. Now, given that there are a few attendees here, should you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them on. Rupali has also been very kind to agree to moderate the questions that will come through. So what I'm going to do is that I'm basically going to share a set of slides, and hopefully that will explain as we get on to the 3 chapters of this webinar, Maggi, smart cities, and the Internet of People. So just give me a minute as I start sharing my slides. Okay. Rupali, would you just confirm if you can see all my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Wonderful.
You can.
So here we go. Here is chapter 1. Now, before I get on to what's Maggi got to do with today's topic, let me tell you a small story. For somebody who was born in the early 70s, the staple of food for me was very often to eat with my mother and my parents at home, which would be rice, which would be dal, which would be vegetables, and something else. But to my utter bemusement, I found it very interesting as we went through the 80s and more so in the 90s when the Internet came on, when I started traveling around the country to find out what do people eat overall. My work took me to Rajasthan, to Madhya Pradesh, to Maharashtra and other places. And I found that the primary staple in the late 80s and in the early 90s in the north of India used to be jowar, used to be wheat, used to be staples like that. But as we moved on through the 90s and came into the late 90s and to the early 2000s, what I found very interesting was the primary shift in eating patterns, wherein people would no longer say that, you know what, jowar is no longer interesting. I want to eat maida. And what I found most interesting when I went over to Delhi University and to other universities around India as part of my collegial interface and my teaching, that outside of the traditional food stalls, wherein there would be dosa, there would be bhel puri, there would be pav bhaji and other food being served, there would be this guy who would stand at one corner. And here is an image of what's actually happening in the North Campus in New Delhi as we speak, near Delhi University, wherein he would chop up some cabbage, some carrots, and basically cook up a mush and ladle out spoonfuls of Maggi on paper plates. And that would be the most successful dish being sold. And I was a little intrigued by this transition, wherein I wanted to basically understand what drove people to move away from their primary food choices and move into eating something which is new, something that they're not used to, something that basically they want to try out, and why would they try it out with so much gusto? Interesting as it was, I further looked into what were the different user points or the different dishes that Maggi actually served. You'd find this very interesting, wherein Maggi actually now gets customized in different ways. So there is Maggi dosa, there is a Maggi sandwich, there is Maggi milkshake, Maggi bhel puri, and as the image here illustrates, there is even Jain Maggi. And in exploring this further, I would actually hear from college students all over the country who would actually say that in their hostels, they would actually boil up a bucket of water using an immersion rod, and the entire dorm would eat Maggi. I was also a little intrigued for us on a survey that came through, which was conducted for the midday meal program in Delhi, wherein in response to the question asked as to what would students in Delhi's midday meal program like to eat, the answer was not that they wanted Rajma Chawal, but the answer was the fact that they wanted to eat more Maggi. And therefore, this primary but a profound choice in the change of food basically showed that there was something very fundamental that is changing in our societal preferences on eating, equally on what individuals aspire to be, i.e., what is the food that they like, and as opposed to what is staid and boring being served at home, regardless of the fact that it's healthy, this is the kind of food that they aspired for. So what I did as part of a little bit of secondary analysis, and I must give a lot of credit to Professor Amita Bhaviskar, who's actually done some seminal research on this, is to understand this phenomenon. Conflate the two narratives. This is India, which is incredibly young. This is India, which is incredibly ambitious. India that wants to stay healthy and fit. But why is it gravitating towards eating Maggi? And guess what I found out? Maggi not only pervaded urbanscapes in India, it actually pervaded everywhere, every part of the country, from Guwahati through to Ladakh and Siachen. In fact, in Siachen, there is actually a dish called the Siachen omelette, which is probably the most popular, wherein they have powdered eggs and Maggi cooked into a sandwich. And that's probably the only dish that survives this Arctic latitudes and allows for a wholesome meal to either the trekkers or, in fact, indeed, the Indian military. So consumption of Maggi was not limited to cities alone, but was increasingly getting pervasive across to different parts of the country. Slowly, Maggi became so pervasive that, in Mussoorie, there was this famous point called the Sunset Point, wherein you would get up into the mountains, stand there, and watch the sunset. Guess what? That sunset point is now called Maggi Point, because people basically eat hot ladles of Maggi and watch the sunset. And as opposed to it being called Sunset Point, it's now called Maggi Point. So you can basically look at the pervasiveness of what Maggi is doing to the overt understanding or the overt preferences, or even the geographical preferences to the society. Moving on, if you were to now look at the urbanscapes in India, you will find that unbranded chow mein or noodles actually dominates our urbanscapes everywhere. The question that I'm asking is, yet despite the fact that it's noodles which are popular, chow mein that's popular, why is it that it's almost dominant for Maggi to be the leader in this space? And in looking at that further, I basically ended up doing a fair amount of research. And guess what? We believe a lot of it's got to do with the evolution of cities, evolution of the internet, and the choices that the people execute as they get on with their lives. So here is what we think is happening. Firstly, in our view, initially when we looked at this data in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, the question was, hey, it's almost grotesque that people are now going to eat Maggi and not eat their traditional foods. And the question asked was, is this even sustainable? That college students, large swathes of young office workers, other people would eat Maggi and would they be happy and continue with it? And the question that we asked at that point was, why is it that the Indian consumer is now gravitating to what is patently a foreign product and not a product that was grown in India? As you all know, Maggi is produced and marketed by Nestle. And in researching that, and if you look at the literature that's available on the internet and otherwise, most scholars now attribute this phenomenon to what is called what is euphemistically called a marketing campaign or a sustainable campaign where you look at proletarian hunger killers. Now, this is a big term, proletarian hunger killers, but what it effectively does is that most MNC companies and large marketing entities would actually look at the entire populace as a pyramid. And in that pyramid, they would attempt to go to the bottom of the pyramid, i.e., those individuals who are living at less than $5 a day or approximately 300 rupees a day, and see how much of that disposable income could go to that proletarian class towards food. And guess what Maggi did in response is it basically dramatically changed the packaging concept of Maggi, wherein Maggi was now available in 35 gram sachets, small packets, which are not biodegradable, by the way, available in less than 10 rupees, and all of it would get cooked in less than 2 minutes. That transition enabled large swathes of the migrant populace in India, student populace in India, young workers who either for paucity of time, inability to cook, lack of exposure to better food, decided that here was something handy. It was useful for us to get it done in less than 2 minutes. Hey, why don't I opt for this option? What happened as a fallout of this is, much as large swathes of people went on to eating Maggi, it's actually the large companies that sold this product that became rich. As we all know, eating Maggi is neither healthy, nor is it really sustainable in the long term. It provides for carbohydrates in the short term to contain hunger, but does not really provide sustainable, edible food for the day or the enough calorific value that is needed for living. So here is the primary conundrum. For a country like India, which is very deep-rooted in what it eats, is proud of what it grows, is looking at being Atmanirbhar, which is the quote of today, not from the time that the research was done, why is it that still people transition to Maggi? Was it ubiquitous availability or was it something else? Now, herein lies the primary trick. Given that India is an incredibly young country, very ambitious country, most MNCs, and particularly in this case, the manufacturers of Maggi, did something very interesting, which is the whole concept of packaged noodles went completely native. So if you were to look at the ad campaigns that Maggi has today, or has been for the last 20 years, you will find no notions of it being food from outside the country coming into the country. It's actually food from within the country, endorsed by celebrities. In this case, Ranbir Kapoor, Amitabh Bachchan, Preeti Zinta, Madhuri Dixit, Joey Chawla, and others. And this whole narrative, or the familiar trope of unity in diversity. So you have oats Maggi, atta Maggi, Maggi as a soup, Maggi as vegetables, all of it providing for instant gratification, eminently socially acceptable, and creating an aspiration that families ought to grow into, thereby providing for that societal acceptability that I have nutritious food coming to me in 2 minutes for something that is, well, Indian in the sense that it's being sold on to the users as Indian, and I'm able to consume it in 2 minutes. So there'd be this narrative wherein this young girl who would start to learn to cook at home, or a young boy learning to switch on the gas at home, guess what? The first dish that they would cook would be Maggi. And in that, the mother would be very proud, and the parents would look at it and say, you know what? My daughter or my son just gave me this bowl of mush, which is Maggi. Now, don't get me wrong. I have nothing particularly against Maggi as a brand or Nestle as a company. What I'm attempting to highlight is the transitory position that we are getting into, wherein everything is focused on instant gratification, everything is focused on social acceptability, everything is focused on accruing skills which are easier to get on with, and yet stays on true to the larger narrative that, you know what, it's Indian, endorsed by celebrities, and that's where we ought to be, i.e. a family no longer finds it interesting to eat jowar ka roti, sattu ka atta. They'd much rather cook Maggi, share it as a family, and that allows for familial bonding. Now, I don't know which side of the sociological divide many of you are, but this is a transition that we ought to look for very carefully, in the sense that there is nothing wrong in eating Maggi, but look at what has happened. With the fact that there is proletarian hunger being addressed, the product is now available at lesser than the price of a kilo of rice. What happens to the individual? The traditional narrative of what were food patterns in the society allowed for bonding within families is increasingly replaced by something that is instant, something that's got to be met with greater alacrity, and thereby creating that all-pervasive notion that all is well. I'd ask that all of us pause and ask this question, is all well? If it is, so be it, let's eat more of it. If not, it beckons a thought for us to see, what do we do? Is it a time for us to pause and see whether we need to get onto instant food, drink a lot of Coke, or do we actually spend time towards familial health, looking at better aspects of life, and thereby making it more accretive in terms of skills, which is cooking? You know, the joke is that for the generation Y and generation Z, cooking will be like the stitching of yesterday, i.e. in the 70s and 80s, large swathes of the youth knew how to stitch, which, by the way, is a skill which is lost for the most part. The question really now is, will cooking as a skill be lost in the wake of familiar food being available, microwaves being available? Beckons a thought. That's where the premise comes on, that if we were to now look at Maggi being cooked in 2 minutes, conflate that with smart cities, how do these two narratives play on? Hopefully this gives you the context of what chapter 1 was onto what Maggi is. Now let me get on to the second narrative, and then we'll attempt to conflate all three when we look at the internet, when we look at smart cities and Maggi. Smart cities. Now, every so often when I speak about smart cities, I will get this rather romantic notion that people have. It's as if there is going to be large greenscapes, waterfalls, waterfall cascading, children bicycling, and the city would be smart, and everything would be romantic and salubrious and ever so nice. The question really is that a smart city is not predicated on this wider American expanse of a large geography. The notion of a smart city actually predicates itself on executing transactions smartly or efficiently. Now, if you were to look at a city, at any point in time, there are multiple transactions happening. A banking transaction, a healthcare transaction, somebody buying something from a store, an education activity going on, college activities happening, military activities happening, traffic getting along. If we are able to execute each of these activities succinctly, cogently, efficiently, that's when the cities become smart. Now I'll go back to the primary narrative. Aren't we almost thinking like the way Maggi is cooked? i.e., my expectation of a smart city is that everything will happen in 2 minutes, everything will happen quickly and on demand, and if it does not happen quickly and on demand, well, the city is not smart enough, or my bank is not smart enough, or my education institution is not smart enough. My hospital's not smart enough. The question we have to ask is, much as we expect that from Maggi, can we expect that from smart cities? In our assertions, cities are actually exploding around the world. Now, if you look at mega cities, and a mega city is defined as any city which has more than 10 million people. In 1950, there was only one mega city in the world, and that was the city of New York. By 1975, there were only 5 cities in the world that had 10 million or more people. By the year 2000, we had 19 cities that had 10 million or more people. And by 2020, we have just had 35 cities. Actually, the number is more like 37. It's just that some of the Indian cities and Southeast Asian cities see a larger populace coming into the city during the day, and then they leave the city at the end of the day. And hence, the number strictly is not included in the number that I present on this slide. So outside of cities being smart, the other notion that we are seeing is that cities are becoming bigger, becoming eminently filled with people. And as they continue to get filled with people, we are almost always saddled with huge urbanization problems that are consistent across multiple cities around the globe. Now, if you were to look at a city, you would have the classical problems most mega cities are faced with: concentration of urban poverty, stressed infrastructure. Given that I know some of you are logging in from Dubai, I know that there are a few of you logging in from the US. I'm based in Bangalore. Rupali is based in Pune and a few other places. You would find that the narrative is broadly similar. There is congestion. There are fewer resources to cope with change. There are urban slums coming up everywhere. There is rise in crime in each of the cities. And therefore, the narrative is similar. Whilst everybody wants things to happen quickly, each of the urban cities or the urban scapes are actually manifest with problems that you see highlighted on these slides. So let's actually step back for a minute and look at some of the root causes that create these issues and see if there is a small workaround that we have that we can manage these issues with. Consider this, and I'm basically going to get into a little bit of history to show you where India is, because the context of our conversation is India. Now, this slide is a little busy, I know, and there are numbers on this slide. So I'd ask that you be a little patient with me as I take you through the numbers. The point I'm making is that if you hark back to 1820, what you see is those countries that had the highest share of the world's GDP. And this is block 1, which is the slide which is the block you see here, which says 1820. China, approximately in 1820, had 30% of the global economy. India had 16%, and then the list goes down with Russia having about 1.7%. We know what happened then with the British coming on. India did not even feature in the top 10 economies either in 1999 or in 2010. Look at where the dominant economies were. The dominant economies were the US, were Japan, Germany, UK, France, Italy, China beginning to come in as one of the top 10 economies, and the other countries being Spain, Canada, and Mexico. But there is a trick to what the numbers of 1999 say, which is that look at those countries which are the top 10 economies, and you will find that the quality of life in these countries actually is better because the urban infrastructure in these cities were good, were dominant, and that allowed for better sustainability, that allowed for better services, that allowed for better aspirations and fulfillment of those aspirations. And people actually gravitated from other parts of the world into these countries, which is countries like the US, Japan, Germany, et al. But there is a very significant economic rebalancing which is happening. Look at what's happening by 2010. You will realize that broadly between 1999 and 2010, the countries which were the top 10 economies of the world were largely identical. But that's only half the story. Look at what's happening by 2050. You will find that almost all those countries which are the top 10 economies in 1999, which will actually struggle to remain a top 10 economy by 2050. And you would find countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, probably even one African country like Nigeria, becoming a top 10 economy. Now, the underpinnings of this is actually not anything else but the population explosion that's happening in these countries. And thereby, given that the productive capacities of these countries are increasing, The dominant economies will be those countries where there are huge, when I say the word huge, there are large numbers of people who are actually productive and thereby becoming productive or becoming accretive to the country's economy. Now, whilst I discuss this, there is another data point that I want you to look at. Look at the world in another pattern. When we looked at population indices that allowed for the economies to be so dominant, we actually found that the population can be broken into three broad categories, i.e., those countries that are aging and aging rapidly, those countries that are shrinking and shrinking rapidly in their population base, and those countries that are seeing hypergrowth. Which is to say that if you were to look at the elderly population, i.e., elderly being defined as those individuals above the age of 65, you will find that the first block on the left, i.e., these countries. So read this chart bottom up, wherein you will realize Japan will have close to 40%, or in this case, 37.8% of its country above the age of 65. Korea will have 35% of its country above the age of 65. I mean, Netherlands will have 25%, China will have 23%. In fact, the US will have more than 20% of its country above the age of 65. Now, we all know that as the population of a country ages, the productivity and the productive capacities of that country comes down. Now, I'd ask that now that we have looked at some significant aging data, we overlay that with what is called shrinking data, which is to say that these are the countries where the fertility rates in these countries are dropping. Look at a country like Bulgaria, which is the last country listed on the second block. Bulgaria will actually have 33% less people in 2050 than it did into the year 2000. Which is to say that if Bulgaria had 100 people in 2000, in 2050, they will have only 66. And if you read that list upwards, Ukraine, Romania, Russia, look at all the countries. Thereby, the average age in this country will be higher. The number of people in these countries would be lesser. And the only way that these countries will survive is that they can get immigrative population coming in from those countries that have hypergrowth. Now, look at a country like India. We ought not to be proud of it. But if you were to look at the population transition between 2000 and 2050 in India, you will realize that the Indian population actually goes up by 55%. Look at a country like Egypt. The population will go up by 85%. Saudi Arabia, 110%. Pakistan, 126%. Above all, look at a country like Nigeria, which is going to grow by 428%. Therefore, understand this dynamic. The dynamic is that those countries which are listed under the category called hypergrowth will be incredibly young, will have their urban infrastructure breaking down, but will have a lot of human capital that will be exported to those countries that show patterns wherein their populations in those countries which are shrinking, those countries which are aging. The conclusions that we can draw is that in 2020, the median age in India was 28. The average individual in our country was just 28 years old, compared to 37 in China, 38 in the United States, 45 in Western Europe, and almost 50 in Japan. So contrast this. If there is somebody who is 28 years old, raring to go, ambitious, wanting to eat Maggi, wanting food in less than 2 minutes, contrast that with somebody who is 50 years old, and there are primary trends which are coming up, which is to say, who will be more successful, who will be more ambitious, and where would we go? The second thing is, understand, 1 out of every 3 world's new workers will be from India, or in fact was from India in the year 2020. I must give you a caveat, though, that some of the data does not include the pandemic. We haven't actually understood the data from the pandemic yet, and we're still evaluating it. Once we know that, we'll be able to make a definitive commentary with greater ferocity. But broadly, 1 out of 3 new world workers was in India. Look at that also, approximately 100 million people. Look at that number, 100 million people will urbanize in the next 10 years, which is staggering. This has not happened in India's history. Now, conflate this with what I told you on Maggi. As people transition away from the rural hinterland to what their familiar surroundings were, into smaller, tighter urban scapes, this has a material impact on eating patterns, consumption patterns, and thereby creating huge pressure on urban infrastructure, on urban cities, and otherwise. Now, the transition is that whilst this has happened, there is something else that's happened concurrently, which is that the internet actually broken its back in the sense that almost all of us are using the internet as pervasively as we can. Now, hark back to how you all used the internet earlier. Chances are that when you first started the internet, you only used that for some web browsing, you probably used that for email, and you did some primary searches for things that interested you, or if you were looking for some data. That's actually now transitioned to what's called, euphemistically called, the Internet of Everything, wherein there is almost no aspect of your life that the internet does not control today. I assume all of you are chatting on WhatsApp. Probably the first thing that you get up and do is to look at your phone. Look for love, look for shopping, look for grocery buying, look for primary data, look for banking, everything happening on the internet. Now, the funniest part is, look, take a country like India, with 100 million people getting into urbanscapes over the next 10 years, and most of them not speaking English, and with the internet largely being in English, how are they actually transitioning and getting onto the phones, getting onto their laptops, using English as a medium that they are forced to use without any formal education in English, and yet thriving in the urbanscapes? That's the pervasive power of the internet. Outside of the dollar value that we can attribute to it, or outside of the economic value that we can attribute to the internet, the dominant activity is that today the internet controls every aspect of your life. And the more that we can actually use the internet more efficiently, the better that we will be in managing our immersive experiences in terms of video conversations, social media, mobility, video, whatever. Chances are that the pace of growth of the internet will actually outstrip the pace of urbanization in the world. Now, as people like me and a few other nerds who actually observe the internet, who observe the development of societies, it's important for us to look at perceptually mapping how the internet grows and concurrently how do urbanscapes actually mash up. Now, let me give you an instance. Now, let's assume you woke up one morning and you found that your data connectivity was very slow, either for Wi-Fi connections being poor or otherwise. Chances are you may not get into depression, but your irritation quotient multiplies significantly. So let me get you back to Maggi. Food not available in 2 minutes, we get angry. Data not available in 2 seconds, you're dejected for the most part, and you're perennially hoping that connectivity improves. Thereby, your perception of what is well-being in your lives improves in manifest ways. Now, this is a transition that, again, we'd have to take positions on whether we sociologically agree or no. But I just thought I'd lay it out to yourselves without any value judgment to say that we ought to increasingly look at what our cities are going to become and how are we actually going to manage this rather unmanageable mess that some of us sometimes find ourselves in, and eke out a quality of life that is both sustainable and fulfilling. Now, going on further, it's our assertion that by 2022, there will be 50 billion objects that will be on the internet. 50 billion. Contrast this to the world population. The world population is going to be somewhere between 9 or 10 billion, which approximately means that each one of us will actually have 6 devices. And increasingly, the things that get onto the internet will no longer be a mobile phone, will no longer be a tablet, will no longer be a PC. It'll be trains, it'll be planes, it'll be power grids, it'll be ships. And therefore, we get back to some literature basically talking about what's called Metcalfe's law, which is that the value of the network will increase proportionately to the square of the number of assets. So let's say, for instance, it's our assertion today that on an average, there are about 30 billion devices on the network, and we believe that by 2022, there'll be 50 billion devices on the network, which means each one of us on this webinar will, on an average, have 6 devices that we will control. I suspect that many of you already have 6 devices today. Chances are most of you have 1 or 2 phones. You probably have a tablet. You probably have a PC. You probably have a camera talking to you somewhere. You probably have an office PC. There are other people in your family using the same data. But every so often, the trick is, understand this transition, is that the data that you use on all the 6 devices is almost the same. It's just that contingent on where you are, what your social setting is, either you're driving or you're traveling, you want that data available to you in a form factor that is readable in the confines of your palm, and thereby making the technology as pervasive, as available, as affordable, as comprehensive, as accurate, and mostly as relevant. Sounds a bit like Maggi, isn't it? I want it quick. I want it in 2 minutes. I want it like Maggi dosa. I want it like Maggi soup. I want it like Maggi milkshake, what have you. And that probably is the innocuous transition I was hoping to make between chapter 1, wherein we spoke about Maggi, and chapter 2, wherein we spoke about smart cities. However, the internet's not all that it seems. And therefore, let me now get on to the third premise of my conversation today, i.e. the Internet of People. So let's attempt to see what the Internet's actually doing to people every day. Now, I'm going to share some data with you in the next slide, but before I get there, I want you to think about it for a minute. How long do you think, most of you who are on the webinar today, how much time do you think you spend on the Internet every day? The data is on the next slide. I'm going to give it to you in just a minute. But I just pause for you to create a mental map and say, I probably spend, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever that number is. Think of it for a minute and let's see what the data shows. So you get 5 minutes to think. How long do you spend on the internet every day? Okay, hopefully you guys have a number in your mind. Here is how long an average Indian spent on the internet. An average Indian in 2020 spent 6.5 hours every day on the internet. That's, excluding sleep, that's excluding daily ablutions, that's excluding some of the other activities that you're pervasively engaged in, including eating. Look at this. I'm sure all of you have used Zomato and Swiggy for food, satisfaction purposes. Zomato and Swiggy today have more delivery partners than Indian Post. So chances are that your food will arrive quicker than a letter if somebody were to write to you in the same city. It's a fact that it arrives to you quicker, but I'm just giving you the pervasiveness of the usage of the internet. I also expect that all of you are on some e-com platform. An average e-com visitor in India spends less than 9 minutes on the platforms, but inherent in this is the transition that I want you to focus on. Only 1 in 2 people, i.e. only 50% of the users, goes beyond the pictures on an e-com platform. And therefore, most of the buying on e-com platforms in India is actually impulse buying. You're actually not spending more time to find out the product, compare the product. You're not looking at commentary made by other users. You're not looking at the compatibility of the product. You're very often buying it relative to what the visual imagery of that product that you want to buy, and then conflating that to your desires and buying it very, very quickly. The other thing is, chances are that you all are using WhatsApp pervasively. Remember this, WhatsApp, YouTube, and Google Maps have their highest users in India. Look at what's happening to education. Byju's is the second highest valued edtech company in the world. And Byju's is the company that just started a few years ago. Look at this also. If you were to just add the customers of Reliance and State Bank of India, just these 2 companies in India, they are more than the entire population of the US. So if Reliance and SBI were to get together today, just their customer base would be more than the entire US population. Look at the dominance of certain users on the internet. Now, you look at the commentary below. I told you that in all probability, all of you have 6 devices that you use. I want to ask you a question. How many of you own more than 1 toothbrush? Here is the transition that our society is seeing. India, for a country which is about 1.3 billion people, has only 600 million toothbrushes. Half the country does not use a toothbrush. They use their finger, they use charcoal, they use something else. But remember, India as a country today has 1.6 billion cell phones. An average individual is first getting access to a cell phone, to the internet, before they're getting access to potable drinking water, before they're getting access to primary hygiene. That speaks somewhat to the kind of society that we are developing. And we ought to, I think, step back and ponder on that, is this sustainable? And I go back to the question that I asked when we spoke about Maggi. Is this grotesque? Is this accurate? Is this viable? Is this where we need to get to? Therefore, now let's look at the other end. One of the things that's going to happen as about the 100 million people who urbanize in India, there are approximately 10 companies who I think are going to disrupt the internet in India. And what I have done is basically curated a list of 10 companies that I think are going to be dominant in the next 10 years. Flipkart, which has now become Walmart. Zomato, probably all of you have used for food delivery purposes or inquiry purposes on restaurants. Look at Policy Bazaar, which is now becoming the dominant seller for online insurance or financial products. Nykaa, by the way, that's a company I got introduced to by my daughter, who basically recently went ahead and bought lipstick and other makeup gear from that portal online. Grofers, which is an online grocery platform. Delivery, which is a courier company. Pepperfry, which is furniture rental. All of us have heard of Jio. All of us have heard of Reliance Retail and Paytm. The best part is none of these companies existed 12 years ago. 12 years ago. Flipkart had started approximately 2007, 2008, but they were just a book-selling company. The other companies did not exist. The question is, what will be the companies that come up in the next 12 years? Who will disrupt these 10? And in the process, materially change the internet of people, the kind of lives we lead, the focus on processed foods, and the ability for us to either consume oodles of data that we either need or don't need, and probably lead a life which does not live up to the primary ideas that we think that we all stand up to. Now, this, by the way, is just one side of the story. The internet also has a large underbelly, and let me highlight that to you. What's happening is that the challenge with the internet is that if you were to look at the data in India, and this is an odd thing which has happened. Let me give you some data, some statistics that might stagger you a little bit. Approximately an average garbage picker in India will not live beyond the age of 39. 400 million people in India, of the 1.3 billion people, will not have access to healthcare. Wherein if there is a serious problem, the only option is death. About 56% of all students who study between grade 8 and grade 12 cannot divide a 2-digit number by a 2-digit number. And if you were to go a little further, expect that a 4-digit number get divided by a 2-digit number, it cannot be done by 67% of the populace. The pandemic has also shown up another interesting thing. Much as there has been a large dependence on the internet, guess what? The female child dropout ratio from online learning has been manifold. Because of potential job losses, an average family living on the edges has basically opted for the girl child to go and work in people's homes as maid, or to bring in activities which are economically compatible to the boy at home. The point I'm making is that not that we ought to be despondent with this data. The premise is, much as that there is a set of the population which is immigrating to cities, wanting instant gratification, looking for coverage at all things very quickly, there is a large part of our underserved population that needs to be looked after, that needs to be managed effectively. Else, we are creating a digital divide that is going to be grotesque and that is going to be unsustainable. So in summary, these are the points I want to make. People today spend more time online than ever in the past. The current generation, by that I basically mean everybody, grew up on the internet and use it for everything. But importantly, there exists a big digital divide. And for all of you on the webinar, if there's a point that you want to take away, that's something that we need to address now. And if we choose not to address it, we'd be creating inequity that is grotesque and not sustainable. Importantly, the internet also provides joy in learning and delivering value to the society for overall growth. So long as we can channelize our energies and look for life and look for opportunities that allows for growth, that allows for delivering value, we are going to be doing something very credible and thereby making sustainable basis of our society with greater acceptability. So in summary, life isn't a cup of hot Maggi, but the future will indeed be bright. So carpe diem, seize the day, and thank you for being so patient and hearing me out. And hopefully you found this interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll just wait. Now we can have a quick question and answer round. If anyone has some questions or would like to share some feedback with Anshish, they can just unmute themselves and speak. Yes, you can unmute yourself and then share your. Yes, Ashwini.
Hello. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are, Ashwini. Go ahead.
Sir, I passed out engineering in 2017, and since then I'm jobless. And these things, one of my friends, she referred me the link of the webinar, and I found the topic very interesting, and I was very eager to know about all the things. And because like drawing the similarities between Maggie and cities, and how we want instant gratification, because I want to know, like, will pursuing higher degree, what kind of degrees, higher degree, master degree, can I pursue in regards to these, like the topics which you told.
So Ashwini, it's a good question. Let me just respond to it very quickly. I just want to give you some data. India approximately produces 1 million plus engineers every year, and 80% of them are unemployed for the first 5 to 6 years post passing out of engineering. What I would ask is, as opposed to looking at activities which are economically sufficient, my submission would be focus on those activities that interest you. And if you were to focus on those activities that interest you, you will excel in what you do. And given the intense competition levels, you will find activities that are economically accretive, i.e. giving you a better compensation reward in the near term. So I would assert, focus on what you like, as opposed to something that will pay you more money in the near term. Because if you excel in those activities, you will do better in the medium term.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwini. Anyone else? They can just unmute themselves and.
Yeah, I had a question. So hi, I'm Navya. So actually, you had drawn a lot of similarities between the 2-minute Maggie gratification and smart cities, and how something that is a 2-minute thing is kind of affecting the smart cities, or the growth of a city. But wouldn't you say if we as a population are kind of getting this gratification from 2-minute Maggie or anything, isn't it like kind of helping our us grow in a way? Isn't it like, okay, so we are kind of like aiming towards getting things that are faster, which in turn helps us kind of produce new technology or produce new methods to kind of help the smart cities grow?
See, I'm not going to weigh in on whether it's good or bad. And that's for conclusions that you as an individual make for your life. Let me just give you some data points.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is Maggie healthy for you? And should you eat
no.
it?
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's not healthy, why would you eat it? But don't get me wrong. It's not like we always eat healthy things, and Maggie is not the only poster child of things which are healthy or unhealthy.
Okay.
The point I'm making is that if everything is to be available in less than 2 minutes, if we are not inculcating the primary efforts of knowing what our roots were, what our sense of belonging was, looking at patient understanding of food patterns, societal patterns, but wanting everything quick, are we missing something in this transition? Now, as the society evolves, what's likely to happen in 200, let's say 50 or 60 years from now? Maggi, which is now cooked in 2 minutes, I think people will expect it in 30 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So what was acceptable as 10 minutes in 1960, wherein khichdi would be cooked in a pressure cooker, you're expecting for that to be done in 2 minutes. So what's going to happen by the year 2070? I'm going to be long gone. But is that a society that is sustainable? Is the premise of wanting something at that very instance without looking at diligent work sustainable? It's more a philosophical question that we have to ask ourselves. I'm not weighing in as to whether one is right or wrong, but that's my point.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Navya. Yes, anyone else who would be interested in asking a question? You can just unmute yourselves and ask Ankshish a question.
I guess it's overwhelming for people to just hear me.
Yes. Anybody?
Angshik, I had a question for as a parent. A lot of parents who used to bemoan the fact that their kids are on internet or their kids are online and their kids are never going out, never playing. Is this what you spoke about today? And what's actually happening out there going to create a mindset change in parents where I see a lot of youngsters finding new avenues for jobs, whether they are content creators, whether they are presenters, whether they are influencers. And these seem to be new modes of, these seems to be a new career choice for a lot of youngsters these days. So do you see this happening, this trend continuing and picking up?
So if you were to follow anthropologists' research today, the trend is that it's likely to continue. There is revivalist positioning going on to say that it ought not to continue. But statistically, it's likely to continue, wherein the expectation for instant consumption will be high. The expectation for everything available on the fingertips will be higher. The desire to do diligent research would be lower. However, there are material benefits to it. Don't get me wrong. Healthcare is improving materially with everything being available at the, let's say, less than 2 seconds to a doctor. So there are different hues to the same premise. As a parent, I'd be worried if I had to take a view, but that's me individually. But sad but true, Priya, but probably that's how it will go, is my guess. What it actually will be remains to be seen.
Yes, thank you, Priya. I think Navya has to say something again. She has sent a message.
No. I was just appreciating the webinar.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your message. Yeah, anyone else would like to ask a question? Yes, Annie, you'd like to say something?
Just wondering, thanking Angshik also for putting together such a wonderful presentation for all of us. And unfortunate that many couldn't join us because of the challenges of joining Google Meet. And I wish we had the people on YouTube also to be able to interact with Angshik. But I'm sure somebody is moderating that also. If any questions are there, if that could be directed here, I'm sure Angshik would be able to answer that also. Thank you.
Yes, I am moderating the questions on YouTube, but I have not found any questions as yet.
Yes, even I'm checking. There are no questions on YouTube as such, but yes, people are sending the feedbacks over there.
Yes,
no
there is a question.
Yes.
If India is going to be leading in the economic trends, will there be a reverse brain drain?
This question's actually been argued a lot, i.e., will people migrate back into the country? India is not short of intellectual capital. Don't get me. So I have Personally, I don't weigh in on the side of reverse brain drain. I believe that the intellectual gravitas that the country has is materially sufficient and, in fact, superior. So I am all for borders being open with people pursuing knowledge everywhere. In fact, the whole notion of the internet militates against the concept of brain drain either one way or reverse brain drain, which is now being called brain gain. The internet actually looks at normalizing everything, making data available to you on a device, regardless of where your geography is. As many people said, the internet makes geography history. So the notion of brain drain becomes irrelevant with a pervasive platform and with ubiquitous data available everywhere.
Yes, Ashwini has to ask one more question. Yes, Ashwini. Ashwini, you can unmute yourself and ask. I think she has to ask.
Hello.
Yes, Ashwini,
Hello.
go ahead.
Yeah. I want to ask, for example, the data which we got to see. What can our government do? For example, our government is changing education policies. It's planning. It has introduced several reforms. But what can we do, sir? I think. There's little problem with our population also, because we all want good news very fast. So I think that's from where the instant gratification we also want to fast. But what can we do, sir, as the general, as a normal citizen, and as government to adapt to these changes better?
That's a very large question. I mean, what can we do? I would say that given our vantage points, we ought to do what we do as efficiently and be the best at what we do. Chances are that somebody is a dancer, somebody is an internet specialist, somebody is a teacher, somebody is a doctor, somebody is a chef, somebody is a student. If we all, in our individual capacities, attempt to be a better version of ourselves every minute and every hour, this is a little bit of poetic English, but I believe in it. Chances are that we will create a position which is more stable and sustainable. Now, if you were to ask for pointed activity as to what the government can do, that's a conversation another day. We'd have to look at specific initiatives and programs and then make some commentary on it. Otherwise, my commentary would be just blasé and not really useful.
I think we have drawn an end to all the questions. And Rupali and Jaya Nagrani, thank you so much for organizing this webinar on behalf of Angshik. And we thank everybody who have joined us on YouTube and on Google. And hopefully next time, since Zoom is a more convenient platform, we hope to see more of you all and more of such webinars on Zoom. Thank you so much, Angshik. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me your Saturday evening in India. I mean, the fact that you wanted to listen to a nerd who gives you a lot of data on the internet, bores you with numbers, compares it to Maggi. Come on, have a life. Go out. Don't come back to my webinar.
No, actually, your webinar was really great. It was really great. It was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I can say that it was like an eye opener for me, Angshik. Thank you.
I put it back on you, Angshik. I think you've made this so immensely interesting with your data and backed by so many, analogies that it's going to be hard to drag us out from where we are.
Thank you, Supriya. You're being kind.
Thank you, Angshik. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Jaya, for giving an opportunity to NOAH to conduct this webinar. And yes, Annie, I agree. Next time, we'll surely conduct it on Zoom so that more and more participants will be able to join. And those who have missed, who are really eager to hear Angshik, we have already the session on YouTube and it is recorded so they can hear it later on also. We'll be sharing the link again in the WhatsApp group. And I just want everyone to just switch on their video cameras. We can just have a quick digital selfie so that we can know whosoever is attending this webinar. Thank you so much, and see you all in few more such sessions. Keep joining. Yeah. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you and bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Shanu. Thanks. Bye.